Listen closely, because if you've ever felt someone thinking about you more than they speak to you, feeling you more than they face you, this message is already touching a nerve. There are people who walk away with their bodies but stay tethered with their minds. And if you are the one they cannot forget, the one who lingers in their silence, this is not an accident. This is a calling. And today you will finally understand why. You are not too much. You were never excessive. You were precise. There exists a rare kind of soul, the one who feels deeply, sees clearly, and loves truthfully. And when that soul crosses paths with someone who avoids their own depth, something profound happens. You become a mirror they cannot escape. You live in their thoughts not because you chase them, but because you awaken something they tried their whole life to outrun. Understand this wisdom. Avoidance is not strength. It is a survival pattern built on fear. And when light meets fear, fear does not affect RGUE-IT hides. Yet even in hiding, it cannot forget the light that revealed it. You, the empath, were not sent to convince, fix, or rescue. You were sent to reveal. Your presence activates dormant emotions, unhealed memories, and unspoken truths. That is why they pull away. Not because you lack value, but because you carry too much truth for someone committed to emotional escape. Hear this with clarity and grace. You are not responsible for someone else's readiness. Divine order does not ask you to shrink so another can remain comfortable in their avoidance. Love that requires self-erasure is not love, it is misalignment. Wisdom teaches us this. When you stop over-explaining your heart, when you stop bleeding to prove your sincerity, something shifts. The empath who learns detachment does not lose love, they gain authority. Peace returns. Energy stabilizes, and the mind that once wondered, why am I not chosen, awakens to a higher truth: I was never meant to beg to be seen. If you lie, affect V in their head, it is because your authenticity disrupted their illusion. But your destiny is not to stay lodged in someone else's inner conflict. Your destiny is to rise into self-honor, divine alignment, and grounded power. Release the need to be remembered. Release the need to be understood. When you choose yourself, the universe responds. And here is the sacred paradox. The moment you stop holding space for those who cannot meet you, you create space for those who will. Not from fear, not from avoidance, but from presence. Stand still in your worth. Root yourself in divine truth. You were never too much, you were simply ahead. And those who avoid themselves will always remember the one who dared to see them fully. Sensitivity is not a flaw in your design, it is the refinement of your soul. The world has conditioned you to believe that feeling deeply makes you fragile, that emotional awareness is a liability, that intuition must be muted to survive. But this belief is rooted in respect and fear, not truth. True sensitivity is not emotional chaos, it is emotional intelligence guided by spiritual clarity. It is the ability to read what is unspoken, to sense shifts before they are announced, and to perceive the truth beneath performance. This kind of awareness is not accidental. It is cultivated through experience, endurance, and divine intention. The sensitive soul feels first because it is built to perceive reality without distortion. While others intellectualize, rationalize, or suppress, you recognize. You feel energy, intention, and emotional undercurrents, not because you are overwhelmed, but because your inner instrument is finely tuned. Like a sacred compass, your sensitivity detects misalignment instantly. That is not weakness, that is discernment. And discernment is power when it is honored rather than apologized for. Your sensitivity becomes a spiritual instrument the moment you stop using it to abandon yourself. When guided by wisdom, it does not lead you in fact, overgiving or self-sacrifice, it leads you into clarity. It allows you to recognize when something is off, when love is conditional, when silence is avoidance rather than peace. This is why your presence unsettles those who are disconnected from themselves. You do not need to confront them. Your awareness alone exposes what they have buried. There is a divine reason sensitive souls are often misunderstood. A world that values numbness will always be threatened by feeling. A culture that rewards detachment will label depth as drama. But spiritual truth does not follow cultural approval. Sensitivity is the language of the soul, and the soul does not shout, it resonates. When you walk into a space, your energy speaks before your words do. That resonance either soothes or destabilizes depending on what it encounters. Sensitivity teaches you timing. It shows you when to speak and when silence carries more authority. It sharpens your intuition so you know when to lean in and when to withdraw. It gives you access to wisdom that logic alone cannot reach. This is why the sensitive soul often sees outcomes before they unfold. You are not imagining things, you are perceiving patterns early. However, sensitivity without boundaries becomes exhaustion. That is where many are misled. They confuse spiritual openness with self-neglect. But divine sensitivity is paired with self-respect. It does not mean absorbing everyone's emotions or fixing what is not yours. It means witnessing without attachment, feeling without drowning, and loving without losing your center. The moment you learn this distinction, your sensitivity transforms from pain into precision. Your emotional depth was never meant to make you smaller. It was meant to make you wiser. It gives you compassion without naivety, empathy without self-erasure. It allows you to understand others while still choosing yourself. This is the mature expression of sensitivity, grounded, intentional, and sovereign. When you honor your sensitivity, you stop apologizing for your needs. You stop dimming your perception to make others comfortable. You realize that your ability to feel deeply is the very thing that aligns you with truth, purpose, and divine order. Sensitivity, when respected, becomes leadership. It becomes clarity. It becomes strength that does not harden but holds. You were never meant to toughen your heart to survive. You were meant to refine it, protect it, and trust it. Because a heart that feels clearly sees clearly, and a soul that sees clearly cannot be easily deceived. Avoidance is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of fear. When someone withdraws, delays, deflects, or emotionally disappears, it is rarely because they do not care. More often, it is because caring would require them to confront parts of themselves they have spent a lifetime avoiding. Avoidance is not rejection of another, it is resistance to intimacy with the self, and that distinction changes everything. To avoid. Effect D is to protect an internal structure built on survival. Many learned early that feeling deeply led to pain, loss, or shame. So they adapted. They compartmentalized. They intellectualized. They learned how to function without fully feeling. Over time, this strategy becomes identity. Distance feels safe. Control feels stable. Emotional neutrality feels like strength. But beneath that structure lives a quiet anxiety. The fear that if they slow down, if they open up, if they stay present, everything they have buried will surface. This is why closeness feels threatening. Intimacy is not just about another person, it is about proximity to one's own emotions. When someone invites depth, consistency, and truth, the avoidant nervous system interprets that as danger. Not because the other person is unsafe, but because the inner world has not been tended to. Avoidance is a reflex, not a verdict. Understanding this reframes the experience of being kept at a distance. It stops being personal and, in fact, becomes psychological and spiritual. The silence, the mixed signals, the pulling away after moments of connection, these are not games. They are symptoms. The avoidant is not running from love, they are running from what love would awaken inside them. Avoidance also creates an illusion of independence. On the surface, it looks like self-sufficiency, but true independence includes emotional availability, not emotional shutdown. When someone avoids, they are often highly dependent on control of time, of space, of narrative. They may appear calm, even detached, but that calm is maintained through constant internal management. Feeling less becomes the way they feel safe. The tragedy of avoidance is not that it distances others, it distances the self. Over time, the avoidant becomes unfamiliar with their own emotional language. They struggle to name what they feel because they were never taught how to stay with it. So when emotion arises, it feels overwhelming, invasive, or destabilizing. Retreat becomes the only option they know. This is why logic often replaces vulnerability. Explanations replace presence. Productivity replaces intimacy. Avoidance hides behind busyness, humor, spirituality, or detachment. It wears many masks, but the core is the same: a fear of being emotionally exposed without the tools to self-regulate. Avoidance does not mean someone lacks depth. Often it means they have too much depth without integration. They feel intensely but do not know how to hold those feelings safely. So they suppress them, and suppressed emotion does not disappear, it waits. It resurfaces in anxiety, restlessness, or sudden withdrawal. Recognizing avoidance as fear rather than rejection allows compassion without self-betrayal. It explains behavior without excusing harm. You can understand why someone pulls away and still choose not to chase them. You can see the wound without volunteering to be wounded by it. The path out of avoidance is not forced closeness, it is CLF relationship. It requires learning how to sit with discomfort, how to feel without fleeing, how to stay present without losing control. Until that inner work begins, no amount of reassurance from another will feel like safety. Safety must be internal before it can be shared. Avoidance, at its core, is not about distance from others. It is about distance from one's own emotional truth. And until that distance is bridged, connection will always feel like a risk rather than a refuge. There are presences that do not need to speak loudly to be felt. When someone carries emotional awareness, authenticity, and inner coherence, their very existence becomes activating to those who have unresolved inner terrain. This is not because they intend to provoke, but because truth has a frequency and anything unhealed recognizes it immediately. The empath's presence does not create wounds, it illuminates the ones already there. Unresolved wounds are not dormant because they are healed, they are dormant because they have been avoided. When a deeply attuned person enters the space, especially one who feels safely, listens intuitively, and responds with emotional accuracy, the nervous system of the wounded individual begins to react. Memories surface, feelings stir, patterns destabilize. What was once comfortably suppressed is now visible. This can feel disorienting, even threatening, to someone who has built their identity around emotional control or avoidance. The empath does not need to ask probing questions or demand vulnerability. Their openness alone invites depth. Their ability to stay present in emotional spaces signals permission to feel, to be seen, to be known. For someone who has never learned how to regulate intense emotion, that invitation can feel overwhelming. It presses against defenses that have been reinforced for years. The result is often confusion, attraction mixed with fear, longing followed by retreat. This is why the empath is often idealized as respect and then distanced. In the beginning, the wounded person feels relief finally, someone who understands without being told, someone who sees without judgment. But as connection deepens, so does activation. The empath's consistency contrasts sharply with internal inconsistency. Their emotional fluency exposes emotional illiteracy, not in a shaming way, but in a revealing one. And revelation requires reckoning. Unhealed wounds carry emotional charge. They hold grief that was never processed, anger that was never safely expressed, needs that were never met. When activated, these emotions demand attention. The empath's presence acts like a tuning fork, resonating with these frequencies and amplifying them. This is not manipulation or control, it is resonance. And resonance cannot be turned off by will alone. Activation often manifests as defensiveness, withdrawal, or sudden shifts in behavior. The wounded individual may feel exposed without knowing why. They may experience a loss of control, effect over their emotional equilibrium. Rather than recognizing this as an invitation to heal, they interpret it as danger. The empath becomes associated with discomfort, not because they caused harm, but because they made avoidance impossible. It is important to understand that activation is not abuse. The empath is not triggering in the malicious sense. They are revealing incongruence between the outer persona and the inner reality. When someone has invested heavily in maintaining a certain self-image, strong, independent, unaffected, being seen at a deeper level threatens that narrative. The reaction is often to create distance to restore emotional equilibrium. This dynamic explains why some connections feel intense, confusing, and unfinished. The empath leaves a psychological imprint not through effort, but through authenticity. The wounded person continues thinking about them because the empath represents a version of self they have not yet integrated. The connection lingers not as new, nostalgia, but as unfinished inner work. For the empath, understanding this prevents self-blame. It clarifies that being activating does not mean being harmful. It means being real in a world that rewards emotional suppression. However, awareness must be paired with boundaries. The empath is not responsible for guiding others through their activation. Healing cannot be outsourced. Activation is a crossroads. It can lead to growth or retreat. Some choose to lean into the discomfort and evolve. Others choose familiarity over truth. The empath cannot control which path is taken. Their role is not to stay and soften the process, but to remain aligned with their own integrity. When unresolved wounds are activated, the response reveals readiness. Those prepared for growth will stay present. Those committed to avoidance will retreat. The empath's presence simply clarifies this distinction. Detachment is often misunderstood as coldness, indifference, or emotional withdrawal, but sacred detachment is none of these. It is not the absence of love, it is the refinement of it. Detachment is the moment love is no longer entangled with fear, control, or self-sacrifice. It is the ability to stay rooted in compassion without abandoning your own center. And this skill is not learned through avoidance, it is learned through wisdom. Sacred detachment begins when you realize that attachment to outcomes is not the same as commitment to truth. Many people cling not because they love deeply, but because they fear loss, rejection, or uncertainty. They confuse intensity with intimacy and proximity with connection. Detachment gently dissolves this confusion. It teaches that you can care without chasing, support without rescuing, and love without losing yourself. This form of detachment does not shut the heart down, it strengthens it. It allows emotion to flow without flooding the nervous system. You still feel, but you are no longer governed by what you feel. You respond instead of react. You choose instead of plead. You remain present without gripping. This is why detachment is sacred. It restores sovereignty to the soul. Many mistake detachment for abandonment because they have only known love that requires self-erasure. In such systems, stepping back feels like betrayal. But stepping back is often the most honest act available. It creates space for truth to surface. It removes the illusion that your effort alone can sustain connection. Detachment reveals whether something stands on mutual presence or collapses without your overfunctioning. Detachment is also an act of respect. It respects the other person's autonomy, their timing, and their responsibility for their own growth. It refuses to interfere with another's lessons out of fear of discomfort. This does not mean withholding care, it means refusing to control. Sacred detachment says, I trust life to do what I cannot, and that trust is deeply spiritual. For those who feel deeply, detachment is a discipline. Sensitivity makes attachment easy too easy. You feel potential, see possibilities, and bond through empathy. Without detachment, sensitivity turns inward and becomes self-neglect. You wait longer than you should. You explain more than is necessary. You carry emotional weight that was never yours. Detachment interrupts this pattern without hardening the heart. When practiced correctly, detachment brings clarity. You begin to see behavior without interpreting it as a reflection of your worth. You stop personalizing silence. You stop filling gaps with imagination. You allow people to reveal who they are through consistency rather than promises. Detachment removes urgency and replaces it with discernment. There is also a spiritual dimension to detachment that is often overlooked. Detachment aligns you with divine order rather than personal will. It recognizes that not every connection is meant to be held onto, and not every loss is a failure. Some separations are protections. Some NGS are redirections. Detachment allows you to release what no longer aligns without resentment or bitterness. Importantly, detachment is not passive. It does not mean waiting without boundaries or hoping without action. It is active alignment. It may involve stepping away, saying no, or choosing distance not as punishment but as preservation. It is the choice to honor your energy as sacred rather than endlessly available. As detachment deepens, peace stabilizes. You no longer feel pulled in multiple directions by unmet expectations. You stop oscillating between hope and disappointment. Your inner state becomes less dependent on external response. This does not make you unreachable, it makes you grounded. People meet you where you are, or they don't, but you no longer chase them across emotional distances. Detachment, practiced with integrity, is not abandonment of others. It is the end of abandoning yourself. Overgiving often disguises itself as love, loyalty, or compassion, but beneath its noble appearance lies a quiet erosion of self. When giving is no longer a choice but a compulsion, it ceases to be virtuous. It becomes self-betrayal. The line between generosity and depletion is crossed the moment you begin to offer what costs you your peace, your clarity, or your dignity. Many who overgive learned early that love was conditional. Affection arrived when they were useful, agreeable, or emotionally available beyond their capacity. Over time, giving became a survival strategy. They learned to anticipate needs, smooth tension, and carry emotional weight that was never theirs to hold. This pattern feels familiar, even righteous, but familiarity does not equal health. Without boundaries, giving turns transactional, even if unconsciously. You give in hopes of being chosen, seen, or valued. You give to prevent loss or abandonment. You give to maintain connection at any cost. In these moments, the act of giving is no longer rooted in abundance, it is rooted in faith. Effect R. And fear-driven generosity always demands a toll. Self-betrayal is subtle. It does not announce itself with dramatic gestures. It appears in the silence after you say yes when your body said no. It lives in the resentment you feel but dismiss. It grows in the exhaustion you normalize. Each time you override your intuition to maintain harmony, you teach yourself that your needs are negotiable. Over time, the soul begins to protest. Boundaries are not barriers to love, they are the structure that makes love sustainable. A boundary is simply an agreement with yourself about what you will and will not tolerate. It is not punishment. It is not control. It is clarity. When boundaries are absent, others may unknowingly consume what you freely offer, assuming it is infinite. But your energy is not infinite. It is sacred. Overgiving also distorts relational balance. It creates dependency on one side and entitlement on the other. The giver becomes the emotional regulator, the planner, the effect fixer. The receiver adapts to being supported without reciprocation. This dynamic does not foster intimacy, it fosters imbalance. True connection requires mutual responsibility, not silent martyrdom. There is a spiritual cost to self-betrayal. When you repeatedly abandon your inner truth to preserve external peace, you disconnect from your own guidance. Intuition grows quiet, discernment blurs. You begin to doubt your perceptions. This is not humility, it is disorientation. The soul thrives on honesty, not sacrifice without consent. Healthy giving flows from fullness, not obligation. It is responsive, not reactive. It does not require you to shrink or disappear. When you give from alignment, there is no resentment afterward, no tally kept, no depletion. The act itself feels complete. This is how you recognize the difference. Learning to stop overgiving does not mean becoming selfish. It means becoming selective. It means allowing others to meet you in effort, presence, and care. Effect T means tolerating the discomfort of letting someone feel the consequences of their own choices. This can feel cruel to those conditioned to rescue, but it is actually respectful. It honors both parties as capable adults. When boundaries are established, relationships either recalibrate or fall away. Those who valued your overfunctioning may resist. Those who value you will adjust. This is not loss, it is refinement. Boundaries reveal who is connected to you and who is attached to what you provide. Ending self-betrayal is an act of self-trust. It is the decision to believe that your needs matter, that your energy deserves stewardship, and that love does not require you to bleed to prove sincerity. Healing does not arrive through being chosen by another, it arrives through choosing yourself in truth. Many wait in quiet desperation for validation, believing that if the other person would finally commit, open up, or return, something inside them would settle. But this belief places him, in fact, ailing outside the self, making peace dependent on someone else's readiness. That dependency delays growth and deepens emotional captivity. The desire to be chosen is human. It speaks to a longing for recognition, belonging, and safety. But when healing is tied to external selection, self-worth becomes conditional. You begin to measure your value by another's behavior, availability, or affection. This is a fragile foundation. It places your nervous system at the mercy of inconsistency and keeps you in a constant state of emotional vigilance. Waiting to be chosen often disguises itself as patience, loyalty, or hope. But beneath these virtues can live fear, the fear that choosing yourself means losing the connection entirely. This fear keeps many emotionally suspended, investing energy into potential rather than reality. They interpret delay as depth and confusion as chemistry. In doing so, they abandon the present moment in favor of imagined futures. Healing requires agency. It begins the moment you reclaim authorship of your emotional life. This does not mean denying love or suppressing attachment, it means refusing to outsource your stability. When you choose yourself, you stop asking another person to confirm your worth. You begin listening inwardly rather than scanning externally for reassurance. Being chosen by someone who is emotionally unavailable does not heal wounds, it often reopens them. Even if the connection temporarily stabilizes, unresolved patterns resurface. Inconsistency continues. Anxiety lingers. Healing cannot take root in an environment where safety is intermittent. True healing requires steadiness, clarity, and self-trust. Choosing yourself is not an act of rejection toward others, it is an act of integrity toward yourself. It may involve stepping away from what feels familiar but unstable. It may involve grieving a version of the future that will not materialize. Grief is not regression, it is processing. It is the nervous system recalibrating to truth. When you stop waiting to be chosen, something subtle but powerful shifts. You no longer negotiate your needs. You no longer tolerate ambiguity that erodes your peace. You begin to orient toward what is mutual, grounded, and emotionally present. This is not settling, it is aligning. Self-selection restores dignity. It reminds you that you are not a passive participant in your life waiting to be claimed. You are an active chooser. This stance changes how you show up in relationships. You become less reactive, less preoccupied, less willing to chase. You listen more closely to behavior than words. You honor what is, not what could be. Healing also involves releasing the fantasy that someone else holds the key to your closure. Closure is an internal process. It comes from understanding patterns, accepting reality, and integrating lessons. No conversation, apology, or reunion can replace this inner work. When you stop seeking closure through another, you free yourself from prolonged attachment. Choosing yourself builds resilience. It teaches your nervous system that safety does not depend on external validation. Over time, this reduces anxiety and increases emotional regulation. You become more discerning, not more guarded. You remain open, but not porous. As self-trust deepens, attraction patterns shift. You are no longer drawn to those who replicate old wounds. You recognize familiarity without mistaking it for destiny. You begin to value consistency over intensity, presence over potential. This is the fruit of healing that originates within. No one else needs to choose you for your healing to be legitimate. The moment you choose yourself, the process begins. Alignment with the divine is not an abstract concept, it is a lived experience of inner coherence. When your thoughts, values, actions, and intuition move in the same direction, something stabilizes within you. This is the state in which power returns, not power over others, but power over self. It is the power of clarity, the quiet authority that comes from no longer being divided inside. When you are out of alignment, life feels effortful. Decisions feel heavy. Relationships drain rather than nourish. You second-guess yourself because you are negotiating between what you know and what you tolerate. Misalignment creates noise in the nervous system. You may call it anxiety, confusion, or restlessness, but beneath it is a simple truth. Something in you knows you are not honoring yourself fully. Divine alignment restores peace by simplifying your inner world. It removes the internal arguments. You stop justifying what hurts. You stop spiritualizing what is misaligned. Instead, you begin to trust the quiet signals that have always been there, the tightening in your chest, the exhaustion after certain interactions, the calm that arrives when you choose truth over comfort. These signals are not weaknesses, they are guidance. Purpose becomes clearer when alignment is restored. Purpose is not a single role or destination. It is the consistent expression of who you are in integrity. When you are aligned, your actions feel meaningful even when they are ordinary. You no longer chase significance, you embody it. Your energy becomes directed rather than scattered, and this focus creates momentum without force. Peace in alignment is not the absence of challenge, it is the absence of inner resistance. You may still face loss, change, or uncertainty, but you are no longer fighting yourself in the process. You grieve honestly. You act decisively. You rest without guilt. This kind of peace is resilient because it is rooted internally, not dependent on external stability. Self-trust is the natural outcome of alignment. Each time you listen to your intuition and act accordingly, you reinforce the relationship you have with yourself. Over time, this builds confidence that is not performative. You stop seeking permission. You stop over-explaining. You know why you choose. Respect what you choose, even if others do not understand. This knowing becomes grounding. Divine alignment also recalibrates relationships. When you are aligned, you no longer negotiate your worth. You attract connections that resonate with your frequency, not those that test your boundaries. Misaligned relationships either fall away or transform because they can no longer survive on confusion or imbalance. This can feel like loss, but it is actually liberation. There is a spiritual humility in alignment. You recognize that not everything is meant to be forced or fixed. You release the illusion of control and replace it with trust in timing, in lessons, in redirection. This does not make you passive, it makes you discerning. You act when aligned action is required and wait when patience is wiser. Alignment restores energy. When you stop leaking energy into misaligned commitments, people, or narratives, vitality returns. Creativity resurfaces. Motivation feels natural rather than present. Assured. You feel more like yourself, not because circumstances changed, but because you came back into relationship with your own truth. Living in alignment is an ongoing practice, not a destination. You will drift and return, question and remember. But each return strengthens the connection. Over time, peace becomes familiar, purpose becomes embodied, self-trust becomes instinctive, and from that place, life is no longer something you chase, it is something you participate in, fully present, grounded, and whole. In closing, remember this truth. You were never meant to lose yourself in depth that isn't returned, nor to dim your light to make avoidance comfortable. Your sensitivity is guidance, your boundaries are wisdom, your detachment is strength, and your alignment is your return to self. When you choose yourself without guilt, you step out of confusion and into clarity, where peace is no longer something you chase, but something you embody. Let this understanding stay with you as a R. Respect emender that love without self-honor is not your path, and what is meant for you will meet you in truth, not uncertainty. Thank you for receiving this message with openness, and goodbye for now. Walk forward in awareness, grounded in your worth, and steady in your becoming.